Sega's past meets the future, and it's not a pleasant sight. This is Sega Masters. Today's episode features our third arcade tie-in in a row. Only this time Sega reaches way back into the coin-op past and mixes in some late 1980s tech to bring us Zaxxon 3D, a sequel to their once popular arcade shooter. And if the suffix hadn't tipped you off, this card is also the second in the SegaScope 3D series. That's right, Sega's LCD shutter specs are back for another round of high-tech 3D action on the Master System. Back in episode 38, we covered the first of the SegaScope cartridges, Missile Defense 3D, and it was a solid debut showing of what Sega specs were capable of. However, Sega's choice for a follow-up is a curious one, as they decided to revisit an old IP of theirs that hadn't been in the limelight for some time. That would be Zaxxon, one of Sega's earliest arcade hits from way back in 1982. Granted, it was a space shooter which was pretty common at the time, yet its unique isometric perspective helped it stand out from the pack. It may seem like a dated novelty today, but Zaxxon was popular enough to get ported to all the major game systems at the time. It also spawned one coin-up sequel, Super Zaxxon, before going dormant. Now, over 5 years later, we find Sega pulling Zaxxon out of mothballs and reworking it as another hopeful showpiece for their 3D specs. Yet unlike Missile Defense 3D, the glasses aren't actually required to play this card. A secret options menu is accessible from the title screen by pressing the pause button on the console, and it lets you choose between 3D mode or a standard 2D mode for those who don't have access to the specs. Obviously, the footage will be taken in 2D mode, so you'll just have to try to imagine the visuals in 3D. Each stage begins with you in open space looking to shoot down the Vargan space fighters, apparently by just hovering in one place and waiting for them to come to you. The game uses a third person behind your ship view instead of the original's isometric perspective, but a number of flaws present themselves right from the beginning. For starters, the visuals in this scene are pretty boring and flat. They do get a little depth added to them when played in 3D mode, but it's still scaling sprites moving over a static background, hardly anything earth-shattering. Also, the perspective makes it difficult to actually hit anything, since you can't get your guns properly lined up with your target. Sega tries to help out by providing a gun sight that appears when you're lined up, but you'll often only see it for a second and it quickly disappears before you can get your shot off. After a few minutes of this, you enter the fortress, which is essentially a first-person view of the original arcade game. You fly down this trench, facing down a gauntlet of gun turrets, with tanks and missile silos thrown in during later levels. You also have to be aware of impenetrable walls that get in your way, and electrical barriers which force you to fly through gaps in order to pass. At the same time, you have to keep an eye on your fuel meter, which steadily ticks down as you progress through the level. Blasting the barrels found in the fortress will replenish it, while running out of fuel will spell your doom. Eliminating certain targets will cause power-up capsules to appear, which you can snag to increase your ship speed, gain more powerful weapons, and even increase your fuel capacity. However, increasing your speed too much, or using the more powerful guns excessively will deplete your fuel at a faster rate, so don't be wasteful. This segment does sport some better 3D than the opening part, with the more convincing look while using the glasses. However, the fortress itself still looks pretty plain, and outside of the obstacles and layout, it doesn't hardly change from level to level, not even with its color scheme. The music also ranges from the annoying theme on the title screen to the rather catchy ditty that plays during the middle parts. Should you survive your flight through the fortress, you cap off the level by engaging one of 3 types of motherships in one-on-one combat. Sadly, these battles require almost no effort. Just attack the weak spot while evading the projectiles, and you'll fail the boss in almost no time at all. The bosses don't even try very hard to dodge or return fire or anything. Once the mothership finally explodes, you move immediately to the next stage for more of the same 3 parts. And this goes on for a total of 9 stages, culminating in a battle with all 3 motherships in a row. But just one trip to the first stage alone shows you all that Zaxxon 3D is about, since the cart seems surprisingly light on content and action, especially compared to its contemporaries. It feels too much like the programmers spent most of their efforts on the 3D effects, and very little on the actual gameplay. The opening scene is just so boring and slow, with easy to shoot down fighters who only change their speed and attack pattern from level to level. Perhaps the tedious pace is Sega wanting every second to show off some fancy scaling, but all they did is bore fans of faster paced shooters to tears. The fortress sections are the only part of the game that generate any real buzz, and even that doesn't last since they're too sparsely populated. Most gamers will be able to get pretty far in the game without really breaking a sweat. Yet to make up for the lack of challenge, getting hit once costs you a life, with very few checkpoints to restart from. Even the bosses don't change other than their shapes, and they're reused after every few levels. You battle all 3 in a row at the end of the last stage, but all you're rewarded with is just a simple mission complete message, after which the game continues on indefinitely. In conclusion, Zaxxon 3D promises something memorable for the Master System, only to end up as a major disappointment. You're just left with the feeling that programmers could have done much more with this concept. The mediocre to boring action isn't going to keep shooter vets engaged, and the card also fails to be a competent showcase for the 3D glasses since it hardly even uses the gimmick to its fullest, other than the fortress segments. As it stands, Zaxxon 3D isn't worth more than an occasional 5-minute playthrough. And the sad part is the Zaxxon name would go back into hibernation, only for Sega to dust it off again 7 years later and slap it on another rather forgettable shooter. Overall, just stick with the arcade original, which can be found on several of the Genesis compilations on the current consoles, and give this card a pass.